Vitaly is really important for this event, for this particular event, Script'19, because you know that we did already 2 events. They were always in January, and you also know that you don't have January at the moment. So we did a little break. We took some time off to take care of our families, to take care of our jobs, and we weren't sure if we wanted to do another ScriptConf. And this is when Vitaly gave us a call. He said, you know, what about doing some workshops together in Linz, which we did in April. And it got us excited, and it got us back on the roadmap and back on the screen of all of you. So in some way, Vitaly resurrected ScriptConf, and for that I think it's super fitting that he will open this conference, and I want you to give a huge applause for Vitaly.
Thank you, Stefan. Oh, it's really, really nice to be here. And you know, the opening of a conference is supposed to be really exciting and very positive, and I have a very negative message for you. It will be probably the saddest talk you've ever heard in your life. I'm not even exaggerating. And this is why I have some liability disclaimer here that I want to kind of show first. ScriptConf doesn't take any liability for the nightmares, headaches, or injuries you're going to kind of experience through this session. And also the things you're going to learn, you will not be able to unlearn. So you are on your own here. And essentially, you know, I've been spending a lot of time this year thinking about privacy. And I was teaching in university in Amsterdam, and then I was in Ukraine, and then I was in Bosnia, and then I went to Austria, and then I went to Germany. And everywhere I went, I was kind of really trying to explore how people see the web. How do they feel about all these wonderful install app prompts and cookie pop-ups and, you know, all these things that really annoy us all the time. And some things were kind of not really surprising, nobody likes them, but some things were kind of shocking in many ways, that many people tend to stay away from the web, that we all love and all. And also many things that are happening are kind of really, really weird. You know, GDPR, right? GDPR. Anybody excited about GDPR? Interesting, a couple of people, right? So maybe one of you will tattoo GDPR on your shoulder after this talk. This is kind of my goal to see, right? Because many of us think that GDPR is a total waste of time. Anybody would agree with that? A couple of people, right? And the further I go to, you know, US and Canada, the more people think like that. That's not surprising. But I really started kind of digging deeper, trying to understand what it even means for us. Right? Where does it come from all of a sudden? Where do cookie pop-ups come all of a sudden? And like, where are we going with this, right? And so I decided to do 2 things which kind of really defined me this year, which is why it was so sad. The first thing, every time somebody is going to send me a link to an app, I'm going to go to extremes to print out the privacy policy in its entirety and read it on a Sunday. I had a lot of really horrible Sundays, I must say, because most of the things kind of take 4, 5, 6 hours to read. That's incredible. And the other thing, every time you get this wonderful pop-up at the bottom, cookie pop-up, I'll go to extremes to opt out from every single tracker, and just to see how difficult they make my life, right? And it's not because I'm privacy obsessed, it's not because I have Tor installed and all, right? I'm not one of those people who are really kind of obsessed with privacy, but I just wanted to understand what it even means. And so it was really surprising to me that all of this has become reality for us, right? We're all used to it, this is not a big deal. We learn how to click away pop-ups, how to ignore things, although actually they do have an impact on us, right? So this is just a really, really bad experience, but sometimes the experience is just horrible. So this is one of the forms you have on one of the insurance websites in Germany, and one of the questions they ask is, do you have children? Right? With the slider, and with a pencil icon and the thing, the digit, right? Well, sliders have this really strange feature, right? They have a minimum value and a maximum value. Luckily, developers took care of the minimum, which is 0, but they also took care of the maximum, which is 5, right? If you happen to have more than 5 children, there is a way out. You can click on the pencil icon, then this thing turns into an input field, which you can adjust, make 6 or 7 or so, but then the interface will tell you, because it's a slider, 5. Right? Because the interface knows better, right? And these things are just really totally disrespectful. And then you go further and you look at websites around. This is one of the really creepy ones. So if you don't like bugs or insects or the illustrations of them, please close your eyes now. It's not going to be beautiful. So this is a website where you can select the tool of choice to kill bugs in your home, right? And I can almost imagine a designer somewhere sitting in front of Sketch and Photoshop thinking, let's change the shadow of red, like the hue of red, right? And then they ended up having this kind of really nice and beautiful, visually appealing in so many ways configurator with a slider with the bug on the slider, right? Well, how often do you see that? And then you answer a couple of questions, and you answer, where the bugs have invaded your house, and then boom, you have a result, the final result. Ironically, this is the only product that they were selling at the time on the site, right? But who doesn't like a configurator of that kind? And then there are just evil companies, right? I mean, I'm like an elephant. I never forget. I never forget. So Ryanair has redesigned and all, but they always, for a long time, they had this little thing where when you were buying a flight on Ryanair, the insurance was added in for you automatically unless you know how to opt out, right? But to opt out, you really need to know how to opt out because it's conveniently located between Denmark and Finland in the country selector. Right? And these things are kind of all over, and I think that many of us are really, really tired of this, and especially it's like everywhere. You look at Instagram, and all of a sudden you see these Photoshopped ads with a hair literally Photoshopped on it to engage clicks, right? And then somebody goes further than that, and let's add some dirt on the banner, because nobody wants to have dirt, right? And then push notifications. Who doesn't like a good push notification, right? And my medic has been really, really creative in the wording, right? You may basically have two options, right? Which is kind of nice. And I almost sense that there was somebody who thought, let's A/B test this. Because they moved away from this to this. I'm pretty sure that this one converts much better, much better. But many of those things are kind of subtle, right? We don't even notice them most of the time. Like those little bubbles that show up, kind of triggering our attention. I've never been to Watch, but now I was told that I actually have something missing there, very much like we have with these bubbles in emails, right? Notifications. And at the same time, we see all these things showing up, like on Booking.com and so on and so forth. Somebody just booked what you're just looking at, right? There are 20 people looking at the thing. And if you look behind the scenes, what is happening there, there is just a JSON file that randomly combines the names, the products, the images, the prices, and the times to show you, to give you the illusion that somebody is buying this very moment. It's kind of really strange that this thing, fake notification for WordPress, is one of the top sellers on Envato market, right? And everybody is kind of really perfectly fine with it. Now, when I started looking into the privacy policies, I discovered things I will never believe existed. One of them is, if you go to Amazon Web Services, they have a product called Amazon Lumberyard. And one of those things, and if you read Amazon's service terms, anybody read it in its entirety? Well, maybe somebody had to do it for work. You never know. So if you go and scroll down all the way to the point 57.10, you'll find out that there is a zombie apocalypse clause, which is not a joke. Because they have this product which is supposed to enable you to build kind of zombies, right? Well, virtual zombies. But if you ever use this as a prototype for an actual thing, they're not liable, right? So this restriction will not apply in the event of the occurrence of a widespread viral infection transmitted by bites or contact with bodily fluid that causes human corpses to reanimate and seek to consume living human flesh, blood, brain, or nerve tissue, and is likely to result in the fall of organized civilization. But Amazon is not liable for that. Right? Isn't that great? That's good to know, right? And so every time somebody sends me a link, I would look into the privacy policy. Anybody used FaceApp? Well, it was kind of making rounds for a while. Did you read the privacy policy behind FaceApp? Because I did, and in fact, this is normal. We give rights to everything. It doesn't matter what it is, we give right to everything. But even worse than that, in the case of FaceApp, where you can upload your face or photos of your family and so on and so forth, you also give them the rights to use these photos in any way they wish, in any product that they're going to build in their lifetime. Right? And it always freaks me out a little. How come that all these services show up? Essentially just, not really well designed. You can upload a photo, the button is not really styled properly. But all of them go to extremes, creating these huge privacy policies of 80 or 90 pages where they get everything from you, right? That was really shocking to me. And in many ways, I asked myself, so how come that we ended up in this world where, we really give away everything by free without not even thinking about it? And even worse than that, they can also give this data away by putting a device identifier on your on a device and give it away to third parties and fourth parties and so on. And luckily, there is a great service, terms of service didn't read, I guess, which kind of highlights everything that you might need to know about the services that you're using. And especially in light of GDPR, it's very, very useful because you need to know what's happening with users' data, right? They kind of collect all the important things to know about every single service you're using. So if you want to be, safe yourself, or also want to keep your customers safe, it's a good idea to look it up, because then you know exactly what happens actually with this data, right? And if you start going deeper, you realize that things are really weird. When these things started happening, people started to fight back with ad blockers, right? When YouTube was serving advertising with CPU-draining cryptocurrency miners, not on the user's behalf, on somebody else's behalf, right? You might be watching a video, and there is a script running, Bitcoining, or Bitcoin mining on your behalf, right? That's kind of interesting. So we started fighting back with things like ad blockers and tracker blockers and all of that. But there is a war going on, a huge war going on between blockers and ad blockers, and blockers, ad blockers, right? Facebook changes the class names in CSS every single day 5 times just to make sure that it cannot be detected by ad blockers. And in fact, sometimes they would actually write this text, sponsored text, because this is what people use to identify advertising, in Canvas, because then it's not accessible for those machines, right? And so you see all these nested classes, sometimes tons of divs and spans randomly changed and named and all of that, right? And I remember a few years ago, there was a big fight against AdBlock Plus. How many of you are using an ad blocker, by the way? Well, that was not very surprising, right? So most of you. And there was a big fight where many companies, advertising agencies and ad companies tried to make ad blockers illegal. And they failed, they lost in court. But there was another fight going on, which is the ad blockers, right? I remember one day after this ad block showed up, right? There was an anti-ad block killer, which essentially is an ad blocker, right? And so this war has been ongoing, and so we use all these tools. AdBlock Plus is one of them, but also Ghost3. Unfortunately, Ghost3 is known for one thing, because Ghost3 as an ad blocker also gathers information about what ads you're blocking and sells information to the companies that are blocking advertising. So you might need to be careful if you're using Ghost3 today. So, even these things, it's really madness going on. And then you end up with all these tools making a huge leap. If you look into top used browser extensions, right, we'll find out that Facebook Container, for example, is really popular, it's getting popular. The newbie this year, Stop Chat pop-ups, right? There's also I don't care about cookies extension. And then the very new thing, Track This, I love it. You can select a profile and totally skew the profile that Instagram and Facebook and so on have on you, because this is going to open 100 tabs, which has a lot of trackers, and they will pretend that you're interested in cars, luxury, drugs, and all of that, right? Totally perfectly skewing your profile, right? And this has become a really normal thing. Also, these kind of extensions, like I don't care about cookies and clickbait remove on YouTube, because this is what it's like on the left, originally. But then if you actually remove all these promo pictures that I've added in just to generate traffic, you get with something that's on the rest. So we're kind of fighting back. And so this has become a state of things. When I was kind of really looking into interviewing people, we have all these things happening on the web, right? We have pop-ups and modals, which are instantly blocked, push notifications instantly blocked, chat window pop-ups mostly blocked, feedback pop-ups mostly blocked, install app prompts blocked, importing context, no. We know about LinkedIn and this entire thing where all of a sudden everybody from all our friends were kind of spammed by inviting them to LinkedIn, so most of the time blocked. So if you think about adding this feature of importing context, it'll be very, very hard to get trust. Geolocation permission without even asking why, blocked. GDPR, okay. Most of the time, we have this little pop-up, I have nothing to lose, what's the big deal? And then advertising banners, blocked. Oh, this is a fun one. Whenever you're asked to turn off an ad blocker, for a very long time I thought that this is just me. I have all these extensions, I know the drill, I know how it works, I'm blocking this and that, but it's not true at all, because there are 2 established strategies which are kind of making ad block becoming a mainstream, which is, whenever you get this message, how many of you would actually turn off an ad blocker? 5, 6, because we know how to make ourselves, find our way. One of the ways is we go into private window, incognito window. Anybody does that? Yeah, some people do. Another one is for these kind of things, and also some other, we tend to use a different browser, right? So people cannot track us, companies don't track us. Anybody does that? Yeah, some people do. And this is kind of becoming a mainstream thing, right? The same goes for access to camera, photos, microphone, email input. That's a fun one. Imagine you're at the airport and you want to get into Wi-Fi, and you have 4 options to sign in with. You have email as an option, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, right? How many of you would choose Instagram to sign in? No, this is our darling. We won't let them in our Instagram. No, that's not going to happen. Twitter, who would sign in with Twitter? A few people, maybe a few. Who would sign in with Facebook? Also, if you're still using Facebook, I mean. Okay. Who would sign in with email? Now, what kind of email would that be, though? Because we have 2 levels of emails, don't we? Now, we have this wonderful email that's filled with accounts and newsletters and creepy stuff that we never check, and then we have our email, right? So this is very important. I would love to see this database of all these emails from airport Wi-Fi, full of creativity, I'm sure. And in fact, in my case, it's marcus@gmail.com. Poor Marcus, by the way, right? But it kind of seems to work fairly well, right? So it's really, really hard to get proper email. It's really, really hard because most of the time we'll be getting either disposable email, fake email, or the second citizen, second-class email, right? Video autoplay, block, capture. Well, what can we do with capture, right? And there is always this notion of I have nothing to hide. And I think this is a very dangerous proposition, very, very dangerous. Because it's not about having something to hide. It's really about protecting something that belongs to you and is nobody else's business. And it's very important because we don't know sometimes what is going to happen to our data. Some of the services that exist out there, they collect data having about 10,000 data points on every single one of them, of us, right? They know us much better than we do, and our friends and our families and our dogs and everybody else combined, right? They know everything about us. And in fact, this data could be used in any way. So this year has been really big for menstrual surveillance, where pregnancy apps happily share information that they collect with managers and the highest bidders. I mean, most of the time it's of course anonymized, but this doesn't have to be anonymized. It depends on how the service is treating you, right? And when you sign up for that service, you're giving these rights for free, right? The same goes for here, pregnancy apps and so on. And it's not even only that. In every industry you will find this, because if there is interest, there will be people collecting this information. Would you like your health insurance company to know how much you exercise, what do you eat, how much alcohol you drink, how much you drive, and all of that? That's not their business, right? Because they could adjust interest rates based on that information. This information is very, very valuable. In fact, have you asked yourself, how come that Instagram and Facebook and all this wonderful service of WhatsApp that we keep using, right? Why don't they have a premium feature? A premium feature, you pay, I don't know, $3, $4, $5 a month, and then you are not tracked, and you don't, you're not spammed, you don't see advertising. Well, they don't have it because the value of your information, of your data, is much more than just $3, $5 a month, right? And this value is actually coming from selling that data to these kind of companies that have a lot of money to spend, right? And another thing, have you ever been in this situation when you felt like you were talking to a friend about something, and all of a sudden, that thing that you spoke about shows up in Instagram, and maybe in WhatsApp, and maybe in other services? Anybody had this experience? Yeah, and we think that, this cannot be right, it must be coincidence. Well, there have been studies showing that every single day, both on Android devices and on iOS devices, there are segments, audio segments, being sent to Facebook servers and to Instagram servers and so on, for some reason, without proper reason, right? We don't know why they're being sent. But this is, happening on our phones all the time. So every time we have a phone near us, there might be things listening, right? So if you have microphone turned on for Facebook, or Instagram, you might want to turn it off. That's not required at all. So just double check to make sure it's right. So these trackers are really kind of pervasive, and at the same time, we really have to fight back. And actually, we started fighting back. But things just getting out of proportion. Just 2 weeks ago, I discovered this tool, which exists, the service that actually is provided. And I couldn't believe that it actually is real. I thought it must be fake, but it isn't. So I just want to show it quickly so you get an idea of what it is.
The Spinner is a new online service that enables one to control articles presented to a pre-chosen specific individual on the websites he or she usually visits in order to subconsciously seed a message in their minds. That person, the target, is exposed to hundreds of items strategically placed as editorial content, repeating the same message over and over and over again. Whether it is propose marriage, quit smoking, initiate sex, or stop riding motorcycles. How does it work? The basic package offers a set of 10 different articles presented to the target 180 times over a 3-month period. The articles, along with their eye-catching headlines, are chosen by a group of psychologists in order to influence the target on a subconscious level. The Spinner sends you an innocent-looking link. The link is sent to the target via text message. When the target presses the link, a cookie connected to the link attaches itself to the target's phone. From this point, the target will be strategically bombarded with articles and media specified for him or her. The story of The Spinner was covered by Rolling Stone, Financial Times, New York Post, The Sun, and many others. Alongside popular preset campaigns, The Spinner also offers tailor-made campaigns. The most requested tailor-made campaign is Settle Outside of Court, which has now been added as a preset campaign, and Get Back with Your Ex. If you're interested in a campaign...
Wow, this is just unbelievable, right? And you know what? It costs $49. It costs $49, so you just plug in an Instagram account of a person that you want to target, and off you go, right? If it really happens, we don't know. It might be a scam, but this is served like it's like psychological influence, subconscious psychological influence as a service. How would you think about it? That's incredible. And so when you think about these things, it actually makes sense for us to fight with GDPR, right? Because in many ways, we tend to believe that this thing, the privacy, is all about us protecting something really precious that we don't want to share with anybody, which is true, and also us having something to hide all the time, which is not true. Because in the end, it's all about having control about the data, right? You might not want to know, your manager, for example, to know that you're planning to quit and maybe change to another job, move to another company before you actually made a decision to do that, while you're just Googling, for example, right? Or you might not want your partner to find out that you're proposing from an Instagram ad because you've been looking at engagement rings online, right? There are all these little things that kind of get lost in this really debate about privacy, which I think are really, really important. And I think that Sarah James Lewis really, really eloquently puts it, because there are so many things that are kind of outside of our scope of things, we just don't see them. So it really makes sense to have some control. And in fact, GDPR was kind of an attempt to do that, right? Now, I asked myself, where does it come from? What does it mean for me, right? And in fact, it was really surprising to find out that it's not a brand new thing. There was a European directive about data, the Directive 95/46. And I spent quite a bit of time in Brussels because I work with the European Parliament, so I'm a bit biased. But there's been this directive since 1995, which actually defines how data is protected across the world, right? And at the same time, because there are also treaties between different countries and the US and Europe and so on and so forth, right? And GDPR is kind of an extension of it, and it comes in 2 parts. GDPR is only one of them, by the way. The other is e-privacy directive. And while GDPR is very kind of general, the other is really what we often tend to see as a cookie law. So GDPR is intending to protect personal data, right? And that really means all kind of data, not just cookies, but IP addresses, mobile devices, IDs, and so on and so forth. And it all kind of makes sense. Okay, so it just wants to protect data and have control about how online identifiers are shared. And in fact, this is probably the most important quote I took by reading GDPR, which is a fantastic reading material for Friday night. I highly encourage you to read it, because the privacy efforts have to be proactive, not reactive. So privacy is a default setting, and you should treat it in your design and in your development, in your testing, and pretty much everywhere in your customer support as a default setting, right? That also goes, of course, for storing data, and also goes for asking people for permission to share the data or gather the data. And so these are kind of the main cornerstones of it. Privacy is a default. Coding standards must be preventive, so that means we need to be aware if there is a leak happening or if there is something that's happening with the user's data, we have to inform them, right? We have to really take cautious, preventive measures to make sure it doesn't happen, to avoid unsafe modules, APIs, third parties, and so on. Because even when we just plug in a script, a third-party script, it's actually our responsibility in the end to find out what happened to that data, because if that particular person requests to delete their data irrevocably, it's our responsibility to go to third parties and request the deletion of that data. And that's usually really, really hard, right? And so if you have only core functionality, you don't need to ask for cookies at all, right? But whenever you need something more than that, like a little bit more than that, you actually have to ask for permission first, very much like building a relationship, right? You start building a relationship not by asking, hey, give me everything you have. And on the website, we just show, here is everything. You either accept or you walk away, right? The privacy has to become this progressive thing when we ask only if we're certain that we're going to get a positive response to that. We can't just show the wall, right? Because according to GDPR, we have to show options, reject or accept. If you show it too early, prematurely, people will just click it away and reject, because rejection has to be obvious, and it's not most of the time, right? And no unnecessary data may be collected with users' consent. Oh, sorry, unnecessary data may only be collected with users' consent, but no data cannot be collected without users' consent. Then there are all these things which are the user has the chance to revoke or edit consent, and they have the right to be forgotten, which is very important. Now, if we look at what actually happened with GDPR, right, most implementations are just horrible, right? And I guess that most of us hate it, like this cookie pop-up, they hate it everywhere, and because they're not implemented in the way that was actually foreseen by GDPR. So this is my favorite example of New York Times, right? By clicking I accept button or close on this banner in the right upper corner, or using our site, you consent to the use of cookies unless you have disabled them, right? That's not a choice, right? It's not like you can click any way you like, but it's still, consent. No, there is no such thing as a silent consent. It has to be a proactive choice, because by default, nothing is provided for free, right? By default, you're not sharing anything, right? And all these wonderful beauties started showing up. Right? You go to extremes trying to opt out, and it might take 3 to 4 minutes to opt out, because there is no option to opt out from everything at once. So you go and you explore. For some reason, some buttons are not opted in, and others are. How wonderful. And it actually takes like 2 to 3 minutes to get it done. Right? Some other companies decided to take a stronger stand against it and say, well, sorry, you're from European Union, no content for you. That's nice. On the Washington Post, they introduced the premium use subscription. Right? So, okay, you have to pay now if you don't want to be tracked. But sometimes, on USA Today, it's like, okay, so we're just not going to serve you like the regular content. We'll have you like European Union experience, which has 0 trackers. I love it. It doesn't surprise me at all, right? And so we started kind of looking into these options, but then they showed up. They showed up. Cookie consent. Well, you have the options, and the necessary is okay. It can be opted in by default. It's perfectly compliant, but the others are not. But you have the button saying select all and confirm. Ah, how nice, right? And then confirm selection, which is more, grayed out. And this has become a trend for a while, and you start going around, and you start clicking on the things to change your settings. And, necessary is marked in, right? Allow all cookies, right? And then it's kind of keeps showing up and so on and so forth. But in fact, it doesn't have to be really difficult, because this is a choice that The Guardian took, right? You want to see personalized ads, you do not want to see personalized ads. And that's essentially everything you have, right? And every time we have to show that pop-up because we want to collect some data, we need to provide at least an option to adjust cookie settings, right? And we also need to make sure that by default, whatever we require can be opted in, that's fine. But then things like analytics and static advertising should not be set in automatically, and then you need to have a choice. Now, of course, this sounds like, one of these options that we don't want to have, because we do want to collect the data, we do want to ask permission to gather it, but how do we do it better? Here's one example, actually, when you have a slider which kind of explains what is required and why. So you kind of explain that I want to collect some data maybe for marketing purposes, but also just we're going to spam you or send you messages only once a month or so, just to provide a little bit of context of why you actually need this data, right? And when we look into this, right, and all this implementation, this is one of the better ones, we'll find out that most of the time, it was kind of weird for a while, because nothing was changing. There were no big GDPR scandals happening, right? And this grace period that was introduced after 2016, right, where everybody had a chance to build in the solutions, right? It was like a grace period where everybody was just looking at what is going to happen, right, in May. And then there were a couple of tools showing up, like this one, which allows you to generate the complaint and send it to your European Union, right? Kind of claiming that one company has misused or abused the personal data. And these things kind of started collapsing and kind of showing rolling, like, because in the end, we ended up with 95,000 complaints being filed over the last year, right? And it's actually very surprising that some of you might know this kind of services, right? AirHelp and others, where you just submit a claim, you just type in the flight, right? And then they do everything else for you, and they get the cut. So there is this kind of new services appearing for GDPR. So just find a breach anywhere, right? And then file it in, and then we're getting a cut, and you can get the rest, right? And this is kind of really weird, right? That this thing starts happening, right? And so when we look into it deeper, though, we'll find out that we need to know a little bit more about what is happening there. And specifically, we need to know that this one, for example, if you're using Quantcast, you might want to reconsider, also because there is a big investigation against Quantcast that actually promises GDPR compliant solutions for cookie consent pop-ups, right? But this is all more like a temporary thing. Remember I mentioned that GDPR is one thing, and there is e-privacy directive, which is the other thing. And in fact, e-privacy directive is being worked on right now, right? And it's a really, really important thing because it's going to change how it moves forward. Because these cookie pop-ups are unlikely to stay. Because if you look into the legislation and what is being discussed right now, as of actually this month in European Parliament, you'll find out that the consent rule to protect the confidentiality of terminal equipment failed to reach its objectives. So the European Parliament knows that the cookie pop-up thing, that doesn't work, so we need to find a better way. And one of the options that they actually went for is a measured reinforcement of privacy, confidentiality, and simplification. And that's really important because what they want to achieve right now is to move this cookie pop-up away, like just kill it altogether, and instead the setting of adjusting privacy has to be built into browsers. So once you install the browser or you update the browser, you're going to get a prompt asking you how much data would you like to share, if you're a European citizen, of course. And necessary will be opted in by default, because this is perfectly fine, right? But everything else would be opted out by default. You have to actively confirm that you want to share your data, right? As they want to kind of push it to browser manufacturers to actually make that change happening next year, which is, I think, a really, really good thing, right? Because the cookie pop-up is going to disappear. But at the same time, marketing industry and advertising industry are not so fond of it, as you might guess, right? But it also has another change that is also important, which is a simplification of this cookie thing, where the analytics, for example, Google Analytics and things like that, will be allowed without users' consent. But everything beyond that, in terms of sharing data, compiling data, collecting data, and so on and so forth, will need to have a permission, right? And they do want to use this do not track mechanism that most of you might know already. And so the user will set do not track header as 0 or 1, depending on the preferences, and then it will have to be advertised by browsers to the servers, whatever website you're using, or whatever web app you're using, right? And it will be our responsibility as developers to find a way to react to that somehow. And if we fail to do so, then we are compliant, right? That means, we are not GDPR compliant, right? Which is, again, our responsibility at this point. And I was in really strange conversations lately. And it's really important to kind of really look into what is happening here. Because when I was in the US now, I was having these really strange conversations with people telling me, so what's the deal with designers and developers? Why do they think that they're any special? If you want to become a designer, you can just wake up one day and say, I'm a designer today, right? You want to become a React developer, you can wake up one day and say, that's it, I'm becoming a React developer today, right? But nobody can wake up in the morning and say, that's it, I'm becoming a lawyer today, right? Or I'm becoming a doctor today. Well, you need to go and study and get a license and become a doctor, right? You need to go and study and get a license and become a lawyer. So the conversation is going, shouldn't designers and developers get a license to, be designers and developers? Right? Because we end up having a lot of influence on the world around us. And if we look at Facebook and other apps, we have a tremendous responsibility as well. So this legislation is kind of trying to push us, whether we want it or not, into something that's a bit more, constitutes kind of aligned with the law, right? And this is a very important thing because it's just a starting point. I'm sure that most of you have heard of the California's new data privacy law that comes into force on January 1st, which is like light GDPR, actually. And the main hope is that there will be a fundamental ground law in the US instead of every single state having a separate privacy law, right? Because that would be really, really horrible for us. So right now, many companies are really panicking because now if they have customers in California, they also have to take care of their privacy as well, right? So it looks like what we're moving towards, right, and I'm almost finished here, is the world where it's all kind of flipped. Instead of saying, hey, we need a permission, give us everything or walk away, we're getting into this world, right? Please allow us to share information on you with 43 other companies, right? And no don't share will be a default, and everything else will be opt-in. right? Which is a much nicer world for me. I don't know about you, but I would feel very comfortable with this. Hopefully not on every website though, right? And so there are tools that we can use. One of them is the GDPR compliance checklist. It's really, really nice. It's actually kind of converts or translates the GDPR into something that we all can understand, right? Then there is also Bienda, which provides this kind of service. We have to pay for it, but they provide a really nice privacy policy as a result, which is also human readable, right? Which is kind of cool. And then there is also Consently, which is also the GDPR. They're kind of only better now, right? But this kind of creates this cookie pop-up and privacy policy and all of that, which is more user-friendly, which is actually really, really meaningful, right? And one thing that's kind of really critical to understand here is that very often we tend to believe that we need to work really hard to just improve conversion. Let's just improve conversion. Let's make conversion better. But it's only one part of the story, because many companies that I'm at least consulting or working with kind of looking into the broader scope of things. It's not just about conversion at this point. You might increase conversion by actually decreasing something else. So you end up with companies looking into time to repeat purchase, progressive privacy rates, how much do people conform to some requirements that we have, or some permissions that we need as time passes by, time to first share, purchase, upgrade, and so on and so forth. So you kind of need to look into this bigger picture of things to understand the actual value of a customer on our side. So it's kind of moved away from conversion to something that's a bit more holistic and long-term, right? And there are a couple of techniques we can use. The simplest one is really, whenever you need any information, you have to explain why you need this information. This could be this info bubbles, right? And this just-in-time explanations kind of give context to people why we actually want to collect the data. And then they're actually much more likely to provide consent to get it, right? On the other side, we also need to explain why the data is provided. So whenever we have a privacy policy or anything like a privacy policy change, it's a good idea to have this little summary, like too long don't read, right? Which kind of explains what has changed or what is being collected, right? These kind of things. On Xing, they introduced the Privacy Hub, which is essentially a really nice overview of everything that's happening to the data, how the data is processed, and so on. What happens with login details, how to recover password even. All the things that are kind of related to user experience in terms of privacy authentication are collected in a one central Privacy Hub, which is also what some companies are trying to look into at this point, which is really, really good inspiration for this, right? And then, of course, there are these beautiful, beautiful things that I talked about in the beginning. Well, you are not going to get a notification permission if you ask this way, right? Maybe 0.5% will actually give it to you, according to the latest studies. And the same goes for things like this. When you want to get access to something or anything of that kind, it's just not going to happen. So, however, whenever something is really useful and valuable, people are much more likely to commit. So whenever you want to follow a flight using push notifications, that's a very valuable feature. So people will actually give you that permission. So you need to find a way to ask permission at the right time and never ask it on the first page load, because you're not going to get it. And once you miss this opportunity, you will never have this opportunity again, right? And maybe we need to really rethink the way we're kind of structuring our experiences, because very often it's on-off. You either subscribed or not subscribed, right? You want notifications, you don't want notifications, right? But maybe it's about time to think about pausing subscriptions, pausing notifications, pausing plans as well, right? All those things. And please, these beauties, I do have to mention these beauties. Every time we think about captures, we think about this, right? But there have been studies that shown if you do use a capture, it's not going to work. It takes 10 seconds for a person who can read a text to solve it, and takes 30 seconds for the audio version. Have you ever heard the audio version? That's the most horrible thing ever. It belongs to a museum of horror art. Really? It's just incredible. And 20% will give up after a few tries, right? And the best thing is, there is no capture in the world which machines cannot solve and human can, right? Because while humans can make only 33% of those captures, machines can do 99.8, right? In 0.05 seconds, right? But then we invented things, right? The invisible capture, which in reality very often turns out to be something like this. I'm almost, just 1 minute, promise, right? Where, this pixel, that pixel of a street sign, is it there or not, right? And we spend so much time working on it. So many companies, when it comes to authentication, for example, spend a lot of time thinking a lot about captcha being the last solution, like last resort. We do all these other things, asking random plain human question, honeypot technique, delays in terms of time traps, and so on and so forth. And only then, if all of that doesn't work, only then capture. So you kind of have to really rethink some of the design patterns and make things a little bit better for our customers. Now, to wrap up, right? There are many things happening behind our scenes without us noticing it. It's not about having something to hide. It's about really protecting what belongs to us. And so we are really good at finding workarounds, clicking away pop-ups and using incognito mode and all of that. And we don't really like the web the way we used to. At least when I was speaking to the students all over Europe, I found out that they really hate the web. They don't like to go to the web. They stuck on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and other things, but they don't go to the web. Right? Which is kind of why we're all here. Right? We want to protect this open web. We want it to be nice and clean and beautiful and usable in the end. And this is why these progressive web apps and all this technology really helps us there. But it's only, it's only meaningful if everything else is more or less okay in terms of privacy and the user experience. And it doesn't seem to be this way. But it might change with GDPR and e-privacy directive coming up next year, which is why I love GDPR. I really do. Sorry if I ruined your feelings. But I think that we need to really think about moving away from this trying to optimize A/B testing and kind of improving these buttons a little here and there towards something that's a bit more meaningful. And I would love us all to see more apps like this showing up. This is the last one.
You might wonder how blind people deal with everyday challenges. Well, normally the answer is simple. We're not that different from you. We play music. We go to school. We go to work. You get the picture. But sometimes the simplest things can be difficult, and we need a pair of eyes.
Connect to.
That's where you come in.
Establishing video connection.
Through your smartphone, Be My Eyes connects the blind with sighted people through a live video connection. Simply choose if you need help or want to help by the click of a button.
That's a nice picture of you and your family, Caroline. Is it for a present? Yes, it's a photo from our parents.
You can help just by installing the Be My Eyes app,
Front image.
and we'll notify you when someone needs your help. And if you're in the middle of something, don't worry. Someone else will step in.
In the end, it's all about having some sort of control about the data, and I would feel really horrible if people who are most vulnerable, who cannot maybe see or kind of access that cookie pop-up or whatever the privacy settings, that their information will be used in any way, like advertisers or marketers wants, without asking them even properly. That's not something I can live with. It's a little bit sad, so I have another video which is funnier,
The answer is simple.
which is this one. That's the story of my life in 40 seconds. Really? And I think that we all live in this world where it's, things are not perfect and GDPR is not perfect, this cookie pop-up is horrible, but the life is the world is unsatisfying, so we can try to make it a bit better. We just need to wait a little. For designers, huge thanks to Parallel Studio for the video, and with this in mind, cats and meow, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vitaly. This is a